My name is Norma Fields. I'm 68 years old. I used to be a hospice nurse. For 37 years, I held the hands of people who were dying, and the ones who loved them but didn't know how to say goodbye. I thought I understood pain, but nothing. Not cancer, not loss, not even the quiet heartbreak of watching someone forget your name after a stroke. Nothing prepared me for the moment my own son slammed a stack of estate documents on my kitchen table and looked me in the eye like I was a stranger trespassing in her own house. Your plans? What a joke, Jared said, his voice low and clipped, as if mercy took too much effort. Then he pushed the folder forward with one brutal shove that knocked over the teacup in front of me. It was my favorite teacup. White porcelain with tiny blue forget-me-nots. A gift from Arthur, my late husband, on our 25th anniversary. I watched the tea seep into the tablecloth like blood. Jared didn't blink. Samantha, his wife, just laughed from across the kitchen island. A quick, sharp laugh like someone watching a bad sitcom. You don't deserve any of this, Jared said. You're just taking up space. That was 3 days before the family inheritance meeting, and it was the first time I realized I wasn't part of their plans. I was their obstacle, their inconvenience, and they had no idea what I would do next. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just reached for a napkin, dabbed the tea spill, and looked up at the photo of Arthur and me on the wall above the fireplace. That photo had faded with time, just like the warmth in this house, just like their memory of who I used to be. Back when this kitchen smelled like cinnamon bread and burnt coffee. Back when Jared still brought home spelling tests to show me, and Leo, my younger son, clung to my arm like he was still afraid the world might spin too fast and leave him behind. But that was another life. This version of Jared wore sharp suits and sharper eyes. He had turned everything soft about himself into hard, efficient lines. He looked at me now the way bankers look at unpaid mortgages. You need to sign these before Friday, he said. We're meeting the lawyer at 10. Just don't make things difficult. Samantha chimed in, gently brushing imaginary dust off her designer cardigan. It's for the best, Norma. It's time to let go of the house. You really shouldn't be managing things at your age. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I knew neither of them were capable of hearing me if I spoke. I watched them leave. Watched Jared grab Samantha's coat like a man finishing a transaction. Watched her slip into it with the ease of someone who'd never spent a minute worrying about bills, or groceries, or what happens to a home when love dies in it. When the door closed, I sat in the silence. It wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything they didn't know about me. Full of the papers they didn't know. I had already signed with my own lawyer 2 years ago, full of the trust fund I had established before Arthur died, and the clause that said no changes could be made without my explicit written consent. Jared thought he was orchestrating some grand move, some clever manipulation of a tired old woman who'd finally give in. But what he didn't know was that I had spent my entire life preparing for one thing: to protect what I built, with my hands, with my hours, with my silences. They called it just space, but it was my legacy. I stood up, picked up the soggy folder. The tea had bled through the documents, and for a moment, I almost pitied the ink. It wasn't the paper's fault it had been used for betrayal. I folded the tablecloth, washed the cup, set it gently on the drying rack, and then I went upstairs to open a drawer I hadn't touched in months. Inside, tucked under a stack of old birthday cards, was my copy of the legal trust, I smiled. Not out of triumph, but out of something colder, something quieter, something they taught me. Never assume silence means surrender. After they left that morning, I stood in the kitchen a long time. The tea stain on the table had dried to the color of rust. And for some reason, I remembered the first time Arthur and I stepped into the tiny storefront that would become our used bookstore. It smelled like mildew and dust and old wallpaper, but he turned to me and said, "I can already see your reading chair by the window." That's how he saw the world, through hope and possibility. We opened Fields of Words 6 months later, with borrowed furniture and a box of mismatched mugs. I managed the front. He handled inventory. Some days, we didn't sell more than 2 paperbacks. But it didn't matter. We were together, and our boys were young enough to still believe in magic. Jared was always the serious one. Even as a child, he walked like he had somewhere important to be. He lined up his toy soldiers in perfect rows, folded his socks a certain way, and never cried when he scraped his knees. Leo, on the other hand, was soft. He would hold my hand for no reason and ask if birds had favorite songs. Once, when I finished reading Little Women aloud and tears streamed down my face, he ran upstairs, rummaged through his drawer, and brought me a tiny square of cloth. "I don't have money for flowers," he said, his little face flushed, "but I can give you this, for when books make you cry." It was a handkerchief, his faded blue cotton, the corner stitched with a shaky little L in red thread. I keep it in the drawer next to my bed to this day. I told no one, but it has dried more tears than he'll ever know. There was a time when all 4 of us fit around a dinner table that only wobbled if you leaned too hard. Arthur used to hum Sinatra while he cooked, and Leo would dance in his socks across the linoleum. Jared would roll his eyes, pretending to be above it all, but he always showed up when it was time to eat. I used to look at those moments and think, this is it. This is the life I prayed for before I knew how to name what I needed. Then Arthur's heart gave out. He was shelving books when it happened. I remember the call, the hospital, the clipboard in the nurse's hands. But mostly, I remember the silence when I came home. The kind that sits in your lungs and makes it hard to breathe. Jared was 32 then. Leo was finishing his master's degree abroad. I asked Jared to come stay with me for a few weeks, just until I could get my bearings. He agreed, but he brought with him spreadsheets, insurance policies, and questions about the long-term plan. We weren't even done with the casseroles people dropped off before he was sorting through Arthur's records. He said he was trying to help. Maybe he was. Maybe grief made him efficient because emotion felt too unstable. But I didn't need spreadsheets. I needed my husband. Then came the recession. Jared lost his job. Leo sent what little he could, and I sold the antique cash register, the leather-bound Dickens collection, and Arthur's prized jazz vinyls to keep the house. Jared never knew how close I came to losing it all. Because I didn't tell him. Because I didn't want him to think I was weak. Because that's what mothers do. We carry what we must so that our children can walk lighter. But somewhere in those years, I stopped being mom and started being a woman who used to be useful. The calls came less often. The advice turned into instructions, and slowly, I disappeared from their definition of family. But that bookstore, those nights around the dinner table, Leo's handkerchief, they live in me, and I remind myself, I was seen once by a man who loved words, and a little boy who thought his mother's tears mattered enough to catch. The next morning, Jared came back with a manila envelope tucked under his arm and a stiffness in his shoulders that told me this wasn't a social visit. He didn't ask if I'd had breakfast, didn't ask how I'd slept, didn't look at the fading flowers in the vase on the table, the same ones Leo had delivered last week for no particular reason. He just sat down like it was his house now, placed the envelope on the table between us, and said, "Let's make this easy, Mom." Easy. That word again. It always meant his version of easy. Quick, clean, emotionless. "I had a lawyer draft an updated plan," he continued, unsealing the envelope and sliding the papers toward me. "Something that makes more sense for everyone involved." I didn't touch them. Instead, I reached for the kettle and poured hot water into my cup. My fingers moved slowly, deliberately. The silence stretched between us like a thread waiting to snap. He cleared his throat. "The meeting with the family attorney is still Friday morning. If you sign this today, we can avoid any confusion. It'll simplify the process." He always did that. Made control sound like a favor. Made erasure sound like efficiency. I glanced at the first page. A power of attorney agreement. He wanted full authority over the trust, over the assets, over the house, everything Arthur and I had built with small paychecks and even smaller savings. He didn't flinch. He looked at me like I should be grateful, like handing over my life's work was a burden he was willing to take on. If only I'd stop being so sentimental. "I'm not asking for control," he added, though that's exactly what he was doing. "I'm offering structure, stability." Samantha appeared in the doorway just then, barefoot, holding a cup of coffee she hadn't brewed. She leaned against the frame, watching us like we were part of some business negotiation that bored her. Then she said, almost casually, "We just want to make sure you're not overwhelmed, Norma. These things get complicated at your age." She said it with a smile, a soft, artificial smile. The kind people wear when they've already made up their minds about you. Then, as if rehearsed, she added, "And I mean, we have to think about mental clarity. It's not uncommon for older folks to feel pressured or confused during legal processes." That part stung more than I expected, not because it was clever, but because it was cruel in that polished, practiced way Samantha had perfected. She could cut you open while complimenting your blouse. I looked at them. Jared, with his folded hands and tight jaw, Samantha with her perfect nails wrapped around my coffee cup, and I realized they'd come with a plan. This wasn't a conversation. It was a coronation, and I was the inconvenience in the way of Jared's throne. From upstairs, my laptop chimed, a new email. I knew it was Leo, right on time. He had a habit of writing when he sensed something was off, even if we hadn't spoken in days. I excused myself, told them I needed a moment. Samantha said, "Take your time," as if time was the only thing I had left. In my bedroom, I opened the email. "Mom, I know you're probably dealing with a lot right now. I trust you to handle things however you see fit. I just want you to be okay. I don't care what the split looks like. I just care that you're protected. Love you, Leo." My throat tightened. It was a short message, but it said everything I needed to hear. Back downstairs, I found Jared pacing in front of the fireplace. Samantha had taken the liberty of rearranging the magazines on the coffee table. I didn't say a word, didn't pick up the documents, didn't comment on the cold cup of tea now forgotten on the table. Instead, I smiled. Small, measured, and I said, "I've already got something in place, but thank you for your concern." Jared's face twitched, just barely. He didn't ask what I meant. Because he knew. Some part of him knew this house, this life, this legacy was not his to control. Not yet. And maybe not ever. They thought I was walking blind through this storm. But I had packed my umbrella long ago. 2 years ago, on a rainy Tuesday in April, I walked into Delaney and Rowe, attorneys at law, with a folder under my arm and a fire slowly building in my chest. That was the day Jared had told Leo at the dinner table, loud and sharp, "Don't teach Mom how to spend her own money." But it wasn't concern in his voice. It was ownership. It was warning. It was the first time I heard my own son speak about me like a liability, not a person. Leo had gone quiet. That night, Arthur's photo above the mantel caught the last of the evening sun, almost watching the whole thing unfold. After dinner, I sat alone in the dark for a long time. I heard the clock tick and the house creak, the sounds of a life lived and built carefully. One brick, one breath, one budget at a time. And I remembered something Arthur once said, long before he passed. It was during one of our slow walks through the old cemetery, where he liked to think out loud. He turned to me and said, "If the day ever comes when our son sees you as a burden instead of a blessing, promise me, Norma, you'll choose yourself." He squeezed my hand. "Don't let love make you blind to disrespect." I didn't say anything then, but I remembered. And 2 years ago, I acted. I walked into Delaney's office with my chin high and my folder firm. He welcomed me like an old friend. He used to borrow books from our store back when Arthur and I ran it. We drank weak coffee and talked about strong decisions. I told him everything. About Jared's shift. About Samantha's subtle digs. About how Leo never asked for a thing. Just wanted us to be together. And I asked him to help me protect what Arthur and I had spent a lifetime building. That's how the trust was born. Every asset, our home, the retirement fund, the rental property we'd inherited from Arthur's aunt, and even the emergency cash I kept hidden in the old bookshelf behind the Jane Austen collection, it all went into a living trust under my name. The clauses were airtight. No decision could be made without my signature, no disbursement without my consent. I held the reins, and I could tighten them whenever needed. Even more importantly, I retained the right to dissolve the entire thing if I ever felt coerced, manipulated, or, as Delaney put it, psychologically pressured through guilt or gaslighting. I remember smiling at that. Delaney always did speak like a legal thesaurus, but that day, his words gave me armor. That night, I filed the documents away, labeled the folder, travel plans, and placed it in the bottom drawer of my wardrobe, under my wool scarves. The irony made me chuckle. So when Jared laid those new estate documents in front of me yesterday, expecting I'd hand over everything in a moment of maternal trust, I already knew his game. He didn't realize he was negotiating with a woman who had already played her cards, won the round, and folded the table up 2 years ago. I didn't need to raise my voice. Didn't need to argue. Power doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like a quiet cup of tea you don't offer them, a legal document they'll never see, a boundary made of invisible steel. I glanced at the framed photo of Arthur again, the same one that had watched Jared's tone shift that night 2 years ago, and I whispered, just loud enough for myself, "I chose me, Arthur, just like you told me to." Outside, the wind stirred the chimes on the porch. Inside, the silence was calm, not hollow. I was no longer afraid of what they'd try next, because I had already made sure They couldn't touch a thing without going through me. I smelled garlic and wine before I heard the laughter. It started softly, just a few plates clinking, low murmurs, and I thought maybe Jared and Samantha were having a quiet dinner. But then the volume grew. Music from Jared's playlist, a little too upbeat for a Tuesday night. More voices. Toasts. I walked out into the hallway, slippers silent on the hardwood floor, and paused by the staircase. From the dining room, I could hear at least 6 or 7 different people talking at once. Someone let out a shrill laugh. Samantha, most likely. Another voice I didn't recognize shouted, "To the future of the family legacy. Family legacy." I stood there for a moment, then turned toward the kitchen. No one had told me about a dinner party. No note, no knock, no text. And I was 20 feet away the entire time. I opened the fridge. Inside, my leftover mushroom soup sat in a small ceramic container. I reheated it quietly, hands steady, and carried it back to the little corner table by the window. The same place Arthur and I used to sit for breakfast, when the boys were still in high school and the mornings were slower. I ate my soup, spoon by spoon, listening to forks, scrape porcelain and champagne corks pop in the other room. I didn't need to be told I wasn't invited. Some absences are louder than words. A pause fell over the laughter. Someone must have said something. Then I heard Jared's voice. Clear, sharp, and slightly slurred. She didn't build anything. Honestly, she just sits there now, like a piece of furniture. The room erupted in muffled laughter. I froze, mid-spoonful. Piece of furniture. That's what I had become to him. A fixture. A relic. Something silent and in the way. I placed my spoon down, stood up slowly, and walked past the dining room. No one noticed. No one looked. The lights were warm and the wine flowed. And in that moment, I realized I had become invisible in my own home. But not powerless. Upstairs, in the back of my closet, sat a small safe behind the lining. I pulled back the flap of old floral wallpaper, spun the dial, and opened the heavy steel door. Inside was the folder, still labeled travel plans, still crisp, untouched. I slid it out and sat on the edge of my bed. My hand rested on the manila cover for a long while before I opened it. Pages of signatures, clauses, stamps, Delaney's notes in blue ink, every item, every account, every asset, neatly tucked away in the trust, under my control, with revocation power. I ran my fingers along the corner of the final page, where my signature sat beside Delaney's, dated almost to the day 2 years ago. I wasn't angry. I was awake. There's a difference. Anger burns hot and quick. It shouts, slams, breaks things. But awakening, it's slow, quiet. It moves like a tide, unnoticed until it's already reshaped the shoreline. Downstairs, the party rolled on. Samantha's voice rose above the rest. Well, after this weekend, everything will be settled. Clean slate. I looked down at the trust. I smiled. Not a joyful smile, but a knowing one. Clean slate? They had no idea how clean it could get. I slipped the folder back into the safe, spun the dial shut, and walked back downstairs, unnoticed once again. I poured myself a glass of water in the kitchen. No one came in. No one said a word. I sat back down at my quiet table and finished the last spoonful of my lukewarm soup. Still good. Still mine. And in that moment, so was everything else. The morning air felt unusually still, like the quiet that settles before a storm. Jared had been up since dawn, bustling around the house with his leather folder tucked under one arm like a briefcase of battle plans. Big day. He muttered over his black coffee, not once looking in my direction. Time to get everything formalized. No more loose ends. Samantha barely touched her toast. She glanced at me once, then away, like a schoolgirl ashamed of a prank gone too far. I dressed in my usual navy cardigan and flats. No power suits, no courtroom drama. Just a soft shawl Arthur once gave me on our 30th anniversary, still warm around my shoulders. At precisely 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. Jared leapt up. "That must be the notary," he called out, grinning. But it wasn't. It was Mr. Delaney, my lawyer. He stepped inside, briefcase in hand, his expression unreadable behind tortoiseshell glasses. His presence changed the atmosphere of the room, like a thunderhead passing over sunlight. "Mrs. Langley." He greeted me first with a respectful nod. Then he turned to Jared. "Mr. Langley and Mrs. Langley," he added toward Samantha, who gave a quick, nervous smile. "We're just waiting on the final signatures," Jared said confidently, tapping his own folder. "I've outlined everything clearly. Property division, transfer of the portfolio assets, timeline for liquidation of the smaller holdings." Delaney raised a brow. "I see. Well, before we proceed with unofficial paperwork, I'd like to present the legally binding document on file." He opened his briefcase. The sound of the zipper seemed to echo. From inside, he produced a thick folder and slid it onto the table with gentle finality. "This is the most recent trust agreement, dated and notarized." Filed under California law, Jared leaned in, then frowned. "What is this?" "It's the active and controlling document of the Langley estate," Delaney said smoothly. "Updated 2 years ago by Mrs. Langley in my office. It supersedes all prior versions." Jared flipped through it, the color draining from his face. What do you mean she controls the trust?" "I mean," Delaney said evenly, "that the entirety of the estate, including all properties, financial accounts, and holdings, remain within a revocable living trust, with full authority retained by the settlor, Mrs. Langley, until and unless she chooses to distribute or amend it." Samantha went pale. "But she's the matriarch," Jared stammered. "This was supposed to pass on. This was the plan." Delaney didn't blink. "It was her plan, and still is." Jared turned toward me, eyes wide. "Mom, what is this? You didn't tell me." I stood quietly, hands folded in front of me. He waved the document in the air. "Why would you keep this from me? I've been managing the accounts, planning the renovations. This isn't how you treat family." Samantha finally spoke, voice tight. "You mean we don't get anything? After everything?" I took a breath. The room held it with me. Then I said calmly, "It's not that you're not getting anything. It's that you never once asked what I needed." Silence. Jared's mouth opened, then closed. Samantha looked down at the floor. Delaney packed up the folder with quiet precision. "If there are no objections, I'll be on my way." No one moved. He turned to me at the door. "You did the right thing, Norma." I nodded once. "I know." When the door shut behind him, I looked at Jared, my son, whose shoulders now sagged not with entitlement, but with realization. He had come prepared to conquer, not to connect, to collect, not to care. And the estate stayed exactly where it belonged. With the one person who still understood its worth was never just in dollars. It was in dignity. And I still had mine. Jared stood frozen for a long time after Delaney left, his fists clenched, jaw twitching. I could see the storm raging behind his eyes, but he said nothing. Then he exploded. "I did everything for this family." His voice shook the walls, rattling the porcelain teacups on the hutch. I sacrificed. I put my life on hold to take care of this house, to manage everything, to keep things running when Dad died. I didn't flinch. No, I said softly. You did everything to control this family. There's a difference. He stopped, like someone had pulled the ground out from beneath him. I continued, my voice steady, deliberate. Family is something you lost a long time ago. You just didn't notice when it happened. Samantha, who had been sitting stiffly next to him, stood up. Without a word, she grabbed her coat and walked out. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the glass in its frame. Jared sat down again, but not with authority, not like a man about to deliver terms. He looked lost. His eyes darted around the room as if trying to spot remnants of a home he could still claim. But nothing in that moment belonged to him anymore. Not the silence, not the weight in the air, not even the regret. He didn't say another word, just sat, breathing like he was carrying something heavy, but unable to put it down. I stood and walked to the kitchen, calm as a slow tide. The kettle had long gone lukewarm, but I heated the water again, the same way I always had, one quiet habit at a time. I reached for the chipped blue teacup, the one with the hairline crack near the base. Leo had once glued it back together when he was 10. You always drink from this one, he'd said, because it feels like home. I ran my finger gently along the rim and poured myself a cup. And another. Just then, the side door creaked open, and a warm voice called, I brought that peach cobbler you like. Figured you could use something sweet after today. It was Mrs. Delaney, not the lawyer, the woman, my friend. I smiled and motioned toward the table. Sit, I'll pour. She took her seat and looked at Jared with a nod. Nothing more. He didn't return it. I handed her the cup I had poured, still in the matching set to mine. Faint lavender flowers along the rim. Jared stood. Slowly. He didn't meet my eyes. Didn't apologize. Didn't argue. He just walked toward the door, a man who had built an entire reality and watched it dissolve in one morning. The only sound was the faint creak of the floorboards under his shoes. He reached the threshold, paused, and then stepped out. I didn't follow, didn't call after him, didn't offer a goodbye. The door clicked shut behind him, like a final page turning. And just like that, the room belonged to me again. Not in title, in truth. Mrs. Delaney blew gently on her tea. You're stronger than you look, Norma. I smiled faintly, watching the steam curl in the air. I've been here all along, I said. People just stopped looking. The clock ticked steadily on the mantel, as it always had. But something had shifted. Not time. Me. It was nearly dusk when the phone buzzed gently against the armrest of my chair. I had just finished rereading the final chapter of The House of Mirth, the same weathered copy Arthur had given me on our second anniversary. The spine cracked softly with every turn, like old bones whispering secrets. I reached over and tapped the screen. Leo's face lit up, framed by the soft glow of his office lamp. His beard had grown in since I saw him last, and his hair curled slightly at the ends, like it did when he was little. That familiar kindness still danced behind his eyes. Hi, Mom, he said, voice warm as a cardigan pulled fresh from the dryer. You okay? I smiled. I'm all right, sweetheart. Just spent the afternoon with some very old friends. Books. Leo laughed. Sounds like you. He paused for a beat, his gaze softening. I heard about this morning. From Delaney. I didn't flinch. Just sipped my tea. The same cup, as always. the one Leo glued back together. He leaned forward. I knew you wouldn't let anyone push you out of the house you built from nothing. His words weren't dramatic. They didn't come with a violin score or a swell of emotion, but they landed, like warm light through old glass. I wasn't worried, he added. You're the foundation, Mom. People forget, but I never did. My throat tightened, and I looked away briefly, blinking into the soft blur of the living room. Everything was quiet, familiar. Mine. Leo continued, pulling something up on his screen. I've been working on something for my sociology thesis. He adjusted the camera to show his laptop screen. I squinted to read the title at the top. The Architecture of Resilience. Women as the Silent Pillars of Family Structure. The document scrolled slightly as he spoke. It's about women who hold everything together, without applause, without credit, just quiet strength, day after day. I've been interviewing people across generations, but mostly, it's about you. I covered my mouth with my hand, not because I was embarrassed, but because the tears came faster than I expected. You're in every paragraph, he said softly. You taught me what grace looks like when nobody's looking. I couldn't speak. My chest swelled with something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not validation, not pride. Relief. Someone had seen me. Someone remembered. He smiled gently. You know, for a long time, I thought strength meant speaking up, fighting back. But watching you, I learned it's also choosing silence when it costs you, standing firm when no one claps. You don't move the world with noise, Mom. You move it with stillness. I let the silence settle between us, not awkward, but sacred. Then I whispered, Thank you. Leo tilted his head. You okay? I nodded slowly. Yes, better than okay. I looked down at the book in my lap. You know, I once worried I was becoming invisible in this house. He shook his head. You were never invisible, Mom. You were just the wall everyone leaned on without noticing. My lips trembled with a smile as a single tear escaped down my cheek. It felt warm, not from sadness, but from being known. He signed off soon after, with promises to visit soon, to bring peach pie from that bakery I liked in Maine. I waved, then sat still in the quiet hum of the living room. Across the room, a mirror caught the light. I looked up, met my own reflection. There I was. Not the worn-down mother, not the silent bystander, not the liability. Just me. Norma. A woman who had held everything, together, and quietly chosen herself, at last. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't see someone fading. I saw someone full of life. The knock on the back screen door was soft, almost unsure, like a memory coming home. I looked up from my teacup, the scent of chamomile still hanging in the warm air of the late afternoon. Outside, the sky was painted in soft gold and blue, the kind of quiet only old neighborhoods know. I rose slowly and opened the door. There stood Marla Baxter, my neighbor of nearly 40 years. Her frame was thinner now, her hair a crown of silver curls tied back with a faded ribbon. In her hands, she held a plate wrapped in a cloth that smelled of cinnamon and butter. Thought you might want a little something sweet, she said. Still use your grandmother's pie plates, I see. I smiled, already reaching for the teapot. Come sit. The porch is warm and the tea's still hot. We settled into the rocking chairs under the awning, the old wood creaking beneath us like it always had. 2 cups, 2 women, 2 lifetimes laced with both silence and resilience. Marla looked out across the yard. I heard voices the other morning, loud ones. Then she turned to me, kind eyes steady. But today, I smelled chamomile, so I figured things had shifted. I chuckled softly. They have. Not because anyone changed, really, but because I stopped needing them to. She passed me a slice of the bread. It was still warm, soft in the middle, crisp at the edge. It tasted like something from childhood, something safe. "You all right, Norma?" she asked gently. "Really?" I let the question linger in the breeze before answering. "More than all right," I said. "Better than I've been in years." For so long, I thought peace meant everything being calm on the outside. But it turns out, it's when your insides stop flinching. She didn't reply. She just nodded, slow, knowing. The way only another woman who had been through fire and come out softened, not scorched, could understand. We rocked for a while in shared quiet, the kind that doesn't demand to be filled. Birds fluttered somewhere in the oak tree overhead. A lawnmower hummed faintly 2 houses down. The world kept spinning. "I don't need to win," I said aloud, almost to myself. "I don't need to prove anything. I don't need to shout or write long speeches or carve a moral lesson in stone." Marla looked over. "Then what do you need?" I looked out into the distance. The garden beds were starting to bloom again, even though I hadn't planted anything in months. "I just need to hold on to myself," I whispered. "That's all. To keep myself intact. After everything. After everyone." She reached over and placed her hand on top of mine. Her skin was dry, warm, familiar. "Then you've already done more than most," she said. "Most people spend their whole lives losing themselves and never realize it." I felt something shift inside me. Not a grand thunderclap of change, but the gentle unhooking of a weight I didn't know I was still carrying. For years, I had tried to mother adults who no longer wanted mothering. Tried to give love in places where it was taken as currency, not care. But sitting there, next to someone who simply came because she heard something and sensed something else, that was enough. "You know," I said, sipping the last of my tea, "Arthur once told me, if the day ever comes when your children see you as an obstacle instead of a root, let go." Marla nodded. Wise man. He was. And I think I've finally done that. I've let go, not out of anger, but out of mercy, for them, and for me. We watched the sky change color again, the sun beginning its slow descent. I didn't feel old in that moment. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt anchored, not by people, by peace, by myself. And sometimes that's all the healing we really need. Arthur's old room had gathered more dust than light in the years since he passed. I hadn't dared touch much of it. His glasses still sat on the nightstand, a book still bookmarked on page 17, as if he'd simply gone for a walk and would return any moment to finish it. But last week, I opened the windows. Then, I opened my heart. And today, I opened the door to the neighborhood. The room had been transformed. Soft rugs on the floor, books lining the shelves we'd once built together, a pair of beanbags in the corner, and the old reading lamp glowing like a lighthouse on the end table. I had spent the past week polishing, painting, and quietly breathing life back into it. Not for me, but for the children who walked by my gate each day on their way to a world that rarely slowed down for wonder. It was now the reading room. And every Saturday morning, I'd read aloud to whoever showed up. Stories about kindness, courage, and quiet heroes. The kind of stories I wish someone had reminded my own children about. This morning, 3 children came. They took their shoes off, sat crisscross on the rug, and listened like their lives depended on the rhythm of words. And in a way, I think maybe they did. After they left, I lingered in the silence. I sat in Arthur's old armchair, now the anchor of the room, and reached for the teacup resting beside it. That's when I saw it. A letter slid gently through the mail slot, sitting atop the welcome mat. It was from Leo. "Dear Mom," it read, "I was hoping you'd join me in Canada this holiday season. There's a local reading fair, and they're always short on voices with heart. I've already spoken with the organizers, and they're thrilled to have you." Attached was a hand-drawn invitation, likely sketched during one of his long office meetings. An image of a small crowd gathered around a woman in a red shawl, reading under a tree. It looked just like me. I smiled. Later that evening, I stood before the mirror in my bedroom. The light was dim, soft, honest. I traced my fingers along the lines at the corners of my eyes. They weren't just wrinkles. They were stories, years, anchors. They said I was just taking up space, I whispered to my reflection. But I know now. I was holding everything together. And I had, quietly, without applause, without acknowledgement, but with strength. I turned, walked back toward the reading room, and fluffed the small cushion on the armchair. It had been slightly deflated from all the little bodies bouncing on it earlier. There, resting atop it, was the handkerchief Leo had given me when he was 8. It was fraying at the edges, but I'd recently stitched it back with red thread. A small patch had been added in the corner, a sunflower, my favorite. His signature beneath it, faded but proud. I laid it gently across the pillow, no longer a forgotten relic. Now, a badge. Outside, the wind stirred the oak tree in the yard. The moon was rising, casting long silver shadows across the floor. The house was still, peaceful, not empty, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the one left behind. I felt like the one who stayed to build something that mattered. I stepped off the plane into a cold I hadn't felt in years, the kind of cold that stung the cheeks but carried with it a strange promise of clarity. Canada. Snow flurried outside the glass windows of the airport. My heart thudded in my chest as I looked around, searching, wondering if I'd still be recognizable after all this time. Then I saw him, Leo. He stood taller than I remembered, wrapped in a forest green coat, and beside him, a man with gentle eyes holding a small bouquet of tulips. Before I could speak, Leo rushed forward, wrapping his arms around me like he hadn't done since he was a child. "Welcome home, Mom," he said into my ear. Home. The word settled softly. "This is Julian," Leo introduced with warmth in his voice. "My partner." Julian smiled and extended the flowers. "Tulips. They're early this year. Just like you." I laughed, awkwardly at first, but it melted something inside me. We rode in silence mostly, the snow brushing the windshield, soft jazz playing on the radio. When we pulled up to their apartment building, I noticed how warm the light looked through the windows, golden and alive. Inside, their home was them. Books lined every shelf, paintings, a fiddle in the corner, ferns curled from clay pots like dancers mid-bow, and in the middle, a wooden table set for dinner. 6 chairs, one clearly never used. Julian caught my gaze. He never let anyone sit there. He said it was your place. Even when friends asked, he'd say, "Nope, reserved." Leo gave a half laugh. "I guess I always hoped." My chest swelled with something I couldn't name. It wasn't sadness. It was recognition. That night, Leo took me to a local bookstore, a small one, filled with character. On the front display, under the sign, Local Authors We Love, I saw it. A novel titled The Quiet Curve of Light by Julian Chambers. Below the title, a handwritten sign. A beautiful tribute to the woman who taught me that silence can raise men, not just words. I blinked away the moisture. Julian, you wrote this? He nodded, bashful. I never met someone who grew through quiet like you did. I learned that through Leo, through you. Later, back home, we sat in the living room. Julian lit candles. Snow pattered against the window like a lullaby. Leo turned to me. I need to say something. I nodded. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you more. Back then, with Jared. I knew things weren't right, but I was afraid. I told myself it wasn't my place. You were just a boy, I said softly. But you needed someone, he insisted, his voice tight. And I didn't come. I touched his hand. You did, Leo. In ways you don't even realize. You were the boy who gave me a handkerchief on my birthday when no one else remembered. The boy who held my hand when Arthur passed. You didn't fail me. You were surviving. He stared at me, and then, slowly, he nodded. On the shelf near the fireplace, I noticed a small silver frame. Inside it, a photograph I hadn't seen in decades. Arthur and me, young and laughing, our arms around Jared and Leo at a picnic. I hadn't even remembered that day until now. Leo followed my gaze. I kept that since I left. I know things weren't always bright, but that moment, we were whole. I leaned forward, touched the glass. We were trying. Dinner was simple: a lentil stew, warm bread, and a bottle of red wine Julian had saved. We talked, laughed, cried a little more. It felt like stepping into a version of life I didn't think I'd ever have. One where I was more than a ghost in someone's memory. At one point, Julian stood and refilled our glasses. Then gently, he gestured to the empty seat. Shall we? Leo stood too and walked over to me, pulling back the chair. Mom, he said, voice trembling. Please, it's yours. I hesitated. So many years of shrinking, of sitting last, of eating cold meals after everyone else had finished. And here, a seat was waiting. My seat. I sat down. And the world didn't shift dramatically. No fireworks, no grand declarations. But inside me, something aligned. I was no longer waiting for someone to see me. I had been seen. Later that evening, while Julian cleared the table, Leo and I sat quietly, sipping tea. I want you to come every year, he said. I want you to know this is always your home too. I nodded. And the chair? He smiled. Taken. Permanently. I thought of Arthur. I thought of Jared. I thought of all the dinners I'd served without a thank you. All the nights I'd sat alone in a kitchen filled with everyone else's laughter. Now, here I was, at a table where I belonged, where I was waited for. Saturday rain came down soft and steady, like a hush blanketing the town. I unlocked the small community reading room I'd set up in Arthur's old bedroom, now lined with shelves, cushions, and a small hand-painted sign above the door. Welcome, readers of all ages. Most Saturdays, we had a handful of kids. Some came for the cocoa, some for the puzzles, and some just for the quiet. But today, no one showed, except her. She stood just past the porch, small frame hunched beneath a too-thin raincoat, water dripping from the edge of her hood. But it was her boots that caught my eye, bright red, scuffed and cracked at the heels, one held together by a safety pin. She didn't knock, just stared through the open door, unsure. You can come in if you'd like, I offered gently, motioning to the warmth inside. She shuffled in, water squeaking from her steps. Her face was pale, freckles scattered across her cheeks like cinnamon. She couldn't have been more than 10. "What's your name?" I asked. "Cassie," she mumbled, tugging at a frayed backpack strap. I saw the sign. I handed her a towel. "You're right on time. Story hour's just starting." She looked around nervously. "Is it only me?" I smiled. "That just means you get the best seat." She sat cross-legged on the big corduroy beanbag by the window. I picked a book from the shelf, a simple one about a lost bear in the woods. But as I started to read, I noticed something. Her eyes weren't following. "Would you like to read a page?" I asked, tilting the book toward her. Cassie hesitated, then tried. Her voice wavered. She stumbled, skipped words, gave up halfway through a sentence. She dropped her head. "I'm not good at it." I moved beside her on the floor. "That's okay. My husband used to read to me when I couldn't get the words right either. We'll do it together." Line by line, we took turns. I guided her finger under the words. She sounded them out, slow and unsure. But by page 3, I heard a rhythm forming. She was trying. An hour passed like a sigh. Afterward, I made cocoa and we sat in the window nook, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. Cassie said, "My mom works nights. She sleeps during the day. Grandma's got Alzheimer's, so I come here alone sometimes." I nodded. She added, "I don't really got anyone to read with." A silence settled between us, not heavy, but wide. I knew that feeling. That longing for someone just to sit beside you, not to fix anything, but just be there. "Some kids," I said, "don't need money. They need presents." She didn't respond, but she leaned slightly against my shoulder. Later, I handed her a small linen square from my bag. An old handkerchief. Soft, mended at the corner where it had once torn. A delicate stitch ran across its edge. "You can keep this," I said. She looked surprised. "It's pretty. It's special. My mother gave it to me, and it once belonged to a very kind little boy who saw when others didn't." Cassie turned it over gently in her hands. The next Saturday, she returned. This time, she brought her cousin. The week after, it was a neighbor from her apartment block. Every time, red boots leading the way. She'd still stumble on some words, but she no longer apologized. One afternoon, after a group read aloud, Cassie waited behind. She lingered by the shelf where we kept the children's classics. "Miss Norma?" "Yes, dear." "If I wanted to make a little library where I live, could you teach me how? Like, how to make signs and label books and stuff." I looked at her, at those bright red boots, still tattered but worn with pride now. My throat tightened. I'd be honored. That evening, I sat by my sewing machine, one I hadn't touched in years. I pulled out scraps of embroidered fabric I'd saved from old aprons, pillowcases, curtains, and I began stitching. Not just one handkerchief, a dozen, each one different. Roses, sunflowers, little moons, stars. I imagined small hands holding them, wiping tears from sad stories, or pressing them to their hearts after a line that made them smile. Arthur would have understood. So would Leo. And maybe, just maybe, one day, Cassie would pass hers on too. The rain returned the next week. But inside the little room, the light was golden, voices warm, laughter rising like steam from our mugs. And in the middle of it all sat a girl in red boots, reading aloud. It came on a Thursday afternoon, slipped between the weekly circulars and the electricity bill. A plain envelope, no return address, just my name written in a hand I hadn't seen in years. but one I'd know anywhere. Jared's. I didn't open it right away. I laid it beside the tea kettle, washed the cups from that morning's reading circle, straightened the bookshelves even though they weren't crooked. But the envelope stayed there, still, unmoving, like a stone at the edge of memory. When I finally broke the seal, the paper inside was lined, folded with care. The first words were simple. Dear Mom. I had braced for blame. Or worse, false affection, a new manipulation, a fishing line tossed back into old waters. But that wasn't what I found. I'm not writing for forgiveness. I just need to say what I never did while I had the right to call you Mom. My hands stayed steady. My eyes didn't blink. I spent so much of my life trying to own you, not love you, own you. As if being your son meant I was owed your sacrifice like a payment due. I confused your patience with weakness, your silence with surrender. I mistook devotion for obligation. A small wind stirred through the cracked window. I didn't move. You probably don't remember, but when I was 7, I fell off my bike in the snow. It was a bad fall. I remember the blood, the cold, how my arm bent the wrong way. We didn't have a car back then, but you didn't hesitate. You picked me up and ran, in boots that had holes in the sole, half a mile to the clinic. I remember crying into your coat and the sound of your heart beating faster than my sobs. I remembered it. The snow hadn't yet been plowed, and I'd feared slipping with every step. But I ran anyway, because his pain was louder than my fear. You never told that story. I did. For years. Like a badge. And yet somewhere along the line, I stopped seeing you as that woman. I started seeing you as someone in my way. I can't explain when or why, but I see it now. I see you. I folded the letter once, then unfolded it. The ink hadn't blurred, but something inside me had shifted. I'm not asking you to write back. I'm not even asking you to think of me kindly. I know I bruised your spirit in ways even silence couldn't cover. But if there's anyone else who walks through your door now, who sits beside you in that room where stories live, please give them a chance to choose better than I did. A single tear threatened, but it never fell. If you ever wonder whether I regret it all, know that I do. I regret it with the kind of ache that doesn't go away with sleep or years. But maybe pain, once named, loses a little of its power. He signed it only with his first initial. J. No flourish, no plea. Just a quiet note from a man standing on the other side of his own wreckage. I sat still for a while. Then I walked to the cabinet under the window, where I kept the drawer for soft things. Old cloths, tea towels, and the handkerchief Leo had given me as a boy. I folded Jared's letter gently and placed it underneath that square of fabric, the stitching now faded but strong. Not gone, just quiet. That evening, as I was closing up the reading room, Marla peeked in with a bag of fresh cookies. "Anything good in the mail today?" she asked, smiling as she set them down. I paused, then answered, "A letter from someone learning how to be kind." Finally. She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a good ending." "No," I said softly. "It's just the right kind of middle." Later that night, after the children had gone and the books were stacked in gentle towers, I opened the window wide. A breeze rushed in, cool, clean, laced with pine and dusk. I stood there, letting it move through the room, through my hair, through the corners where old pain had once taken root. Not all wounds scar the same way. Some close without applause. Some just stop bleeding and go silent. I didn't expect Jared to show up on my doorstep. I didn't need him to. The letter was enough. Not for him, but for me. Because some ghosts don't need to be chased out. They just need a name. And once named, they lose their grip.